All right, everybody, we had an interesting development yesterday. Jesse Jackson endorsed Bernie Sanders for president. Let's take a listen to that endorsement.
I stand with Bernie Sanders today because he stood with me. I stand with him because he's never lost his taste for justice for the people. I stand with him because he stands with you.
Ryan, to break that down for us a little bit, you obviously wrote extensively about Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign in your book. I mean, I think it makes sense from a movement, political perspective. What does this endorsement mean at this time? Do you think maybe it should have, maybe it could have come earlier during South Carolina? But broadly, what are the threads and the differences between Sanders' campaign and Jesse Jackson's campaign?
I mean, not much other than time.
Yeah.
If you look back, and that's why I put Jesse Jackson in the subtitle of the movement that led to the Bernie Sanders campaign. If you look at his platform, the ideas that he was pushing in 1984 and 1988 are virtually identical to what Sanders is pushing now, though they're slightly updated for the new language that we use today. And one of the most prominent supporters in 1988 of his campaign was socialist mayor of Burlington, Bernie Sanders, who it was the first time that he had decided to get involved in Democratic primary politics. He actually went and led a caucus in Vermont for Jesse Jackson, spoke for him on the stage. After he got off the stage, went back into the crowd, a woman in the audience slapped him across the face.
What?
Because he had organized this progressive coalition that had basically taken over the Democratic Party in Vermont. And there was this hostility toward him, and it is the precise kind of suburban educated hostility to Bernie Sanders that still exists today, and despite Jesse Jackson's endorsement, is going to continue to hurt him in Michigan. But yeah, slapped him across the face. He wrote about it in his memoir in the 90s.
That's wild. So what was it about the suburban? Well, that's fascinating, right? Yeah. That the suburban voters are what quashed Jackson then. They're what possibly may quash Bernie now. What is the thread between those two? And were the establishments as hostile to Jackson at the time as they were then that they are to Bernie or Sanders right now?
Yes, they were hostile in the same way. Although there's this bizarre move where one of his top strategists at the time, Jesse Jackson, was Ann Lewis, Barney Frank's sister, who was a progressive activist. She was fighting back against the establishment, supporting Jackson. She's now kind of a chair on the super PAC of DMFI, which is that super PAC that was running anti-Sanders ads.
Right.
So a lot of these players are still around. Some of them have switched sides. But the skepticism and the hostility towards the Jackson-Sanders wing is a lot of different mingled things. It organizes around the idea of electability. In 1988, they said there's no way Jesse Jackson could win. Maybe they were right. Dukakis couldn't win either. Now they say there's no way that Bernie Sanders can win. Some of that, though, is justification, whether conscious or unconscious, for a politics that says, you know what, we don't actually think the government is that capable of delivering all these things. We might agree with you on some abstract level that everybody should have health care, and that we should confront climate change, we should do something about civil rights, but we don't actually believe that the government is going to be effective at carrying out those solutions. They won't necessarily say that because they're fundamentally kind of liberal, but when it comes down to it and they have an opportunity to vote for that, they don't.
Well, this is the other interesting thing on this, which is that, and the party's also shifted, which is at least at that time, there were a lot more working class voters that were within the Democratic Party. This time around, one of the things that essentially happened with the Trump phenomenon is a consolidation within the Dems of the suburban, upper middle class and elites, and that alliance is essentially overpowered, at least from a media perspective, and it seems from a voting perspective, in terms of where the base of African American voters are willing to follow, has basically overwhelmed the working class support that was kind of the ethos of the Democratic Party from the beginning. Does that, come into play here?
And the electability question comes into place because there is not a lot of overlap between these two elements. So you'll have people in these suburban islands who don't know any Bernie Sanders supporters. They actually do know Bernie Sanders supporters. They're cleaning their house. They're fixing their cars.
Right.
They're serving them their coffee or
they're actually everywhere. They just don't talk to them.
Right.
Right.
But so in their social circle, they don't know any Sanders supporters, and so they say, well, if I don't know any Sanders supporters, how on earth could he possibly win? Whereas when it came to the Trump phenomenon, the kind of Republican establishment was eventually able to kind of just accept the idea that there were a lot of these.
Well, I can tell you it took quite a while because
Right.
I remember it at the same time of, I don't know, people were like, I don't know anybody who supports Trump. I don't know anybody who supports Trump. And I go on Facebook and you look at some of the people he grew up with, all from Trump. You're like, what's going on here? And it would be the same thing in the primary. I'd talk to people that were returning from the field and I'd be like, what's it like out there? They'd be like, man, Rand Paul rally, boring. Marco Rep, they're like, you go to a Trump rally? Like, I've never seen anything like it. I think there's a lot of semblance in the Sanders campaign.
Yes,
well.
this is something that would need more exploration.
Yeah.
But they have also separated Sanders supporters and more suburban Democrats when it comes to social media.
Right.
Like a lot of those Sanders people they don't use Facebook anymore. Like they used to. But it became just this kind of like toxic and either toxic or boring place.
Right.
And so you don't have that kind of interchange that you had on Facebook in 2016 with Trump supporters and Trump opponents, which at least allowed you to see, oh, my uncle, my cousin. So because all the Sanders folks are on Twitter or elsewhere, they're not interacting with their aunt, who doesn't even realize they like Bernie Sanders.
Certainly interesting. Let's also take a look what AOC had to say about Jesse Jackson's endorsement.
A rainbow coalition of everyday Americans to fight for our common cause. A rainbow coalition to fight for racial justice, for economic justice, for human rights. And politics like that have always been deemed unelectable in this country. But he almost got it. And I want to talk a little bit because in 1984, Reverend Jackson delivered a speech known as the David and Goliath speech. And he said, it's time for a new course, a new coalition of new leadership, a choice, a chance. Now, listen to this. This was his analysis back then in 1984, that Reagan won not by genius. He won while we were asleep. He won by the margin of despair. He won by the fracture of our coalition, by the margin of racial division. He won by default. Does that sound familiar, Michigan?
Well, I think she's been reading your book, Ryan. But I think she was photographed with it on her desk. But tell us, what's the thread that she's trying to draw there to the new progressive movement? Because now, look, it looks, Bernie's not doing that well. It's certainly possible. Look, if ever there was a person that was going to have an upset with these particular states, it would be now. So let's not count him out. Yeah. But she seems to be laying the groundwork and trying to draw threads between something that goes forward.
Yeah, and I go deep into this argument in the book, and it's a fundamental disagreement about how you win elections. And Jesse Jackson argued in the pieces that she quoted that Reagan didn't win because he amassed some huge army. He says he won by the margin of our despair, and he goes around the country citing how much Reagan won each state by, and then citing the number of registered voters who didn't turn out, who are normally Democratic voters, students, black voters, Hispanic voters, immigrants, and arguing if we can rally those people and get them out, then you can win. To hear Ocasio-Cortez talk about the margin of despair and the disaffected voters being unwilling to turn out and possibly giving the election over to Republicans, when you think about Joe Biden and how many people he's able to bring out to rallies, it should be real cause for concern for Democrats. I've heard some public official on NPR say gatherings of 10 or more should be avoided because of the coronavirus.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, Joe Biden rallies should be okay.
Yeah, they certainly should be. I think the entire thing is fascinating because it's like a dual political time that we're living in. At the same time that Jesse Jackson who ran the first true populist left campaign, endorses Bernie Sanders. AOC, I saw Tim Alberto of Politico talking about who he'd never seen a presidential surrogate like AOC ever get a reception. At that exact same time, Joe Biden is on track to win the Democratic nomination with the Democratic establishment. Just got a text from Crystal, actually, who's on vacation but still texting, saying a story saying that Biden is considering appointing Jamie Dimon to the Secretary of the Treasury, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, and Michael Bloomberg to the World Bank. You could not have a more stark thing, and yet, I mean, it's almost, it's despairing in a way to see something like that rise up, and then at the same time you see that the establishment still has so much power.
Well, what we are witnessing is the Democratic leadership trying to align the party away from the working class coalition that Sanders, Jackson, Ocasio-Cortez are trying to push. What they want to do is they want to replace working class left voters, working class populist voters, with Republicans who are upset about Donald Trump's bad manners and the way that he takes immigration policies that they support over the line.
Right.
Like they're willing to go up to here on immigration. He goes over here. And so they want to pull in all these people. So they want a new party. So what happens to these millions of people who are being left behind by the Democratic Party? And that could be the future of American politics, that question, the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, we're right here, everybody, and we're coming for you. So next on Rising, journalist Paul Steinhauser. He shares his latest dispatch from the campaign trail he's been seeing in Michigan. That's when Rising continues.